long before the first Space Marine walked across a battlefield, before the Imperium stretched across the stars. There were the Custodians, not born, not raised, forged. The Adeptus Custodes are not warriors. They are the Emperor's will made flesh. And to understand them, we must go back to the beginning, to the very roots of perfection. The Adeptus Custodes were not created to be soldiers. They were not envisioned to lead armies or win wars. They were conceived as something greater, living extensions of the Emperor's own perfection. Each custodian is the product of an ancient and highly secretive bioalchemical process, distinct from the one used for the Space Marines. While Astartes are mass-produced warriors built for conquest, the Custodes are crafted as individuals. Each one is genetically unique. They are not made in batches, but forged one by one through a process that takes decades, if not centuries. This process includes genetic sculpting, psychic screening, mental conditioning, and the implantation of unique war spirits that make every custodian a singular creation. The Custodes were born before the Great Crusade, during the time of Terra's unification. Even then, the Emperor knew he needed protectors who could not only wield weapons, but also wield wisdom. They are more than fighters. They are philosophers, orators, and guardians of secrets. Some sources even suggest that the first custodians may have been involved in the Emperor's earliest experiments, possibly even the Primarch project. It's tempting to think of the Custodes as simply better Space Marines, but that's a misunderstanding. The Astartes are weapons designed to be deployed, obey, and destroy. The Custodes are guardians designed to think, judge, and choose. While a Space Marine is the result of a rigid template, a custodian is a masterpiece. Where the Astartes function in squads and rely on unit cohesion, custodians fight alone or in small elite formations. Their weapons are crafted specifically for them, often bearing their name or personal history, and their golden armor is unique to each warrior, a living testament to thousands of years of service. Custodians are also vastly more intelligent and self-aware. They are trained in philosophy, logic, theology, diplomacy, and art. Many can recite thousands of works of pre-imperial literature, understand xeno-languages, or debate metaphysics, as well as they wield a guardian spear. This intellectual superiority is deliberate. The Emperor created them to act not only as his bodyguards, but as his eyes, ears, and voice in any domain, political, martial, or metaphysical. During the unification of Terra, the Custodians were rarely seen on the battlefield en masse. Unlike the Thunder Warriors, who fought in legions and died in droves, the Custodes were surgical. They served as emissaries, executioners, and bodyguards, deployed when failure was not an option. When the Emperor met with rulers of techno-barbarian states, it was a custodian who stood at his side. When rogue psychers or warp phenomena erupted during the early days of human resurgence, it was often the Custodes who neutralized them, with methods far more refined than those of the Proto-Astartes. They were also instrumental in enforcing the Emperor's will on the Terran nobility and the early Mechanicum. Some acted as political liaisons or philosophical advisors. Others, like Constantine Valdor, first among the Custodes, became legends in their own right. It was in this era that the Custodes began developing what would later be called the 10,000, a body of warriors so elite and so devoted that their loyalty was never questioned, not even by the Emperor himself. They walked beside gods but remained men, men remade beyond mortal comprehension. But no matter how perfect, no creation is beyond trial. And when the stars called, the Emperor's custodians followed. What they saw, what they endured, would forever change the very meaning of loyalty. When the Great Crusade began, the Adeptus Custodes accompanied the Emperor on his most critical campaigns. Unlike the Space Marines, who were organized into legions and dispatched across the galaxy to bring thousands of worlds to compliance, the Custodes stayed close to the Emperor himself. They were not generals or commanders of vast armies. They were precision instruments, deployed in moments where diplomacy, secrecy, or overwhelming threat called for more than brute strength. Their numbers were few, never more than 10,000, and each custodian was irreplaceable. They could not afford attrition like the legions Astartes. Their deployment was selective, their assignments meticulously planned. Custodes appeared during negotiations with xenospecies, during rediscovery of forbidden technologies, and during instances where imperial authority was being challenged in subtle or ideological ways. Some were embedded directly within the imperial palace, even as the emperor journeyed the stars, acting as enforcers of law and silent watchers of the imperial bureaucracy. Others accompanied the emperor as he met the primarchs for the first time, ever vigilant, ever silent. No discussion of the Custodes during the Great Crusade is complete without Constantine Valdor, the first of their kind, High Lord of the 10,000 and the closest mortal to the Emperor himself. Valdor was more than a warrior. He was a political figure, a strategist, and the conscience of imperial unity. Valdor often acted as an intermediary between the Emperor and other factions, particularly the Mechanicum and the nascent Council of Terra. His presence alone could silence debate. Unlike the Primarchs, who often acted with emotion and ego, Valdor embodied serene judgment. He was not above questioning the Emperor, though always with the intent to preserve his vision. Valdor was also involved in the early tensions between the Custodes and the Legiones Astartes. While the Space Marines viewed the Custodians with awe, the reverse was not always true. The Custodes, forged to guard the Emperor, regarded the Astartes as flawed weapons, useful, powerful, but ultimately expendable. This tension would simmer throughout the Crusade, especially as some Primarchs like Leman Russ or Perturabo began to resent the implicit authority of the Custodes. It was clear that while the legions were the arm of the Imperium, the Custodes were the heart, quiet, unseen, and incorruptible. Unlike the Astartes, whose existence revolved around conquest and battle, the Custodes were expected to understand the why behind the Imperium's expansion. Many served as scribes, historians, or observers during key compliance missions, not to report to generals, but directly to the Emperor. A custodian might spend a year embedded in a newly compliant world, studying its culture, its faiths, and how its people responded to imperial truth. If corruption was found, they would act, surgically and mercilessly. If compliance faltered, they would judge whether the world deserved redemption or extermination. This intellectual and philosophical training made Custodes uniquely qualified to advise on governance. On many occasions, newly compliant worlds received not an Astartes governor, but a custodian advisor, one who would guide the integration of imperial law with centuries-old native tradition. Such roles made them hated in some circles, revered in others, but always respected. Despite their power, the Custodes were bound by a principle. They were not conquerors. Their mission was protection and judgment, not expansion. They avoided prolonged campaigns and rarely engaged in wars of attrition. This sometimes put them at odds with the Astartes, who saw the Custodes' restraint as arrogance or weakness. There were also darker reasons. The Emperor understood that the Custodes were not infinite. Every fallen custodian was a wound to his personal vision. As such, they were shielded from meat-grinder wars. Their deployment was symbolic as much as strategic, a statement that the Emperor was watching and judgment was near. But this caution came at a cost. In several theaters of war, including the early stages of the Rangdan genocides, the Custodes refused to intervene beyond observation, despite horrific Astartes casualties. Their aloofness sowed resentment, seeds that would bloom into bitterness during the Heresy. Yet through it all, they remained unshaken. They were not Space Marines. They were not brothers. They were the Emperor's golden shadow. But what happens when even the perfect fail? When the greatest guardians in the galaxy cannot save the one they were made to protect? The siege of Terra would not only test their strength, it would shatter their soul. When Horus turned against the Emperor, the Custodes were among the first to grasp the true magnitude of the betrayal. While the Space Marines fought across the stars, often unsure of who was friend or foe, the Custodians understood from the outset. This was not rebellion, it was an existential war. However, their hands were tied. The Emperor had withdrawn to the Imperial Palace to work on the Webway project, leaving Constantin Valdor and the Custodes with orders to avoid open warfare unless absolutely necessary. Their role became one of containment and preservation, protect the palace, secure Terra, and prevent internal collapse. But the situation worsened. Traitor legions burned their way across the galaxy. The Custodes had to act, not in great numbers, but in precise interventions. They launched covert strikes against Alpha Legion assets on Terra, disrupted Wordbearer cult activity, and operated in shadows while the walls of the Imperium shook. Even still, they were restrained. Many Custodes felt caged, warriors designed for perfect execution, yet forbidden to unleash their full fury. The greatest unseen battle of the Heresy was not fought on the walls of Terra, but beneath them. Deep in the dungeons of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor's secret webway portal was under siege by demons, spilling in through the cracks of reality. And it was the Custodes who held the line. For decades before the siege of Terra, the Custodes fought in the labyrinthine tunnels of the webway, far from the light of day. Alongside Sisters of Silence and elite Mechanicum cohorts, they battled horrors not meant to exist in real space, battling endlessly with no hope of reinforcement. It was during this war that the toll of perfection began to show. Custodians, once serene, elegant beings, began to fracture. They questioned, they doubted. Some fell silent, some raged, some never returned. The project ultimately failed. The webway portal collapsed. The Emperor was forced to sacrifice himself on the Golden Throne to keep the breach sealed. And in that moment, the Custodes knew they had failed. When the traitor legions reached Terra, the Custodes stood at the palace gates, shoulder to shoulder with the Imperial fists, the Sisters of Silence, and the last loyal defenders of humanity. It was the most apocalyptic battle in Imperial history, and the Custodes were everywhere. They led counter-assaults against the Death Guard, dueled Wordbearer Dark Apostles, and fought beside Rogel Dawn himself during the final defense of the Sanctum Imperialis. But it was not enough. Not even the 10,000 could hold the tide. When Horus finally teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit, it was not the Custodes who accompanied the Emperor, but Sanguinius and Dawn. The reasons remain debated. Some say the Custodes were too valuable to risk. Others say they were ordered to defend the palace. But among the 10,000, it was a wound that never healed. When the Heresy ended and the Emperor was entombed upon the Golden Throne, the Custodes underwent a transformation, not of body, but of purpose. They draped themselves in black cloaks. They withdrew from politics. They ceased to speak to outsiders. They became myth. These black shrouds were more than mourning. They were a sign of disgrace. The Custodes had failed their one mission, and they would not forgive themselves. From that day on, the 10,000 stood vigil over the throne, unflinching, tireless, and voiceless. The legions were broken, the Imperium changed, but the Custodes remained, watching, waiting, enduring. After the Heresy and the Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne, the Adeptus Custodes withdrew from the wider Imperium. Their new doctrine was absolute. They would no longer act beyond Terra. No matter the threat, no matter the world burning, the Custodians would never again leave the throne undefended. This change was not ordered by Guilliman, nor by the High Lords of Terra. It was chosen by the Custodes themselves. Their silence was not born from cowardice, but from shame. The black shroud they adopted was not only a symbol of mourning, but a vow. Their presence on the battlefield had not prevented the fall of the Emperor, so they would not risk failure again. For millennia, they stood in silence. They became a legend, then a myth. Ordinary citizens of the Imperium did not know they existed, and among the High Lords, they were a constant, unblinking reminder of judgment. For the Custodes remained watchful, even if they no longer spoke. Within the Imperial Palace, the Custodes transformed the halls into a bastion. They trained relentlessly, reviewed security protocols with inhuman precision, and fortified every passage leading to the throne room. The entire inner palace became a labyrinth of wards, traps, psychic barriers, and golden warriors waiting silently in the dark. Each custodian knew every inch of the throne complex. They studied historical patterns of infiltration, monitored psyker activity, and maintained war readiness without interruption for 10,000 years. It was not stasis, it was discipline beyond imagination. Even in silence, the Custodes evolved. Some trained in unarmed combat against demon hosts. Others studied theology and imperial law to advise the few souls granted audience with the Emperor. They became the embodiment of vigilance, not merely protecting the Emperor's body but his legacy and his dream. Though most of the Custodes remained in the palace, a silent evolution was taking place. A hidden circle within their ranks, later known as the Chamber of Vigilance, began collecting information about the Imperium beyond Terra. They were not agents in the field, but custodians of truth, curating every scrap of intelligence from inquisitors, navigators, and rogue traders. The chamber compiled dossiers on corruption within the ecclesiarchy, incompetence among the High Lords, and rising threats from Xenos and Chaos alike. These golden archivists saw the truth. The Imperium was rotting from the inside, and the Custodes could not stand idle forever. This secret faction did not act directly, but they laid the foundation for the eventual reawakening of the 10,000. They reminded their brethren, through ritual, meditation, and ancient recitations, that the Emperor's will was never static. It was action, justice, vision. As millennia passed, the Custodes grew inward. They formed silent orders, not unlike monastic cults, dedicated to specific aspects of their eternal mission. Some studied the theology of the God Emperor, though they did not worship him. Others focused on mastering every known language in the Imperium. A few devoted themselves to pure silence, speaking only once every century. These cults didn't fragment the Custodes, but enriched them. Each custodian had the freedom to evolve within the framework of their eternal duty. This spiritual dimension became essential to their survival. Without it, the burden of immortality and failure would have crushed them. The longest-serving custodians, some over 15,000 years old, became sages among warriors. They carried not just memory, but perspective. They had seen the birth of unity, the rise and fall of gods, and now watched the Imperium slide into decay. And yet, they stood. At the heart of the Imperial Palace lies the Golden Throne, a colossal arcane construct that defies human understanding. Once envisioned as a conduit into the webway, it is now a prison and a life-support sarcophagus for the dying body of the Emperor. For 10,000 years the Custodes have stood before it, but they do not simply guard it physically. They ensure that the rituals, technologies, and psychic containment systems surrounding the throne remain uninterrupted. This includes coordination with the Adeptus Mechanicus, Ordo Sinister, and select navigators and psychers who maintain the Astronomicon. To be assigned to the throne room, to stand within sight of the Emperor's husk, is the highest honor and heaviest burden a custodian can bear. Many describe the presence of the Emperor as a burning weight in the soul. Some break under the strain, others emerge changed, more than human, or perhaps less. There are no words spoken here. The Custodes do not communicate inside the throne room. All gestures are ritualized, all movement is prescribed. The atmosphere is heavy with ozone, incense, and absolute reverence. This is not a war zone, it is a living reliquary. To be assigned to the throne room, to stand within sight of the Emperor's husk, is the highest honor and heaviest burden a custodian can bear. Many describe the presence of the Emperor as a burning weight in the soul. Some break under the strain, others emerge changed, more than human, or perhaps less. There are no words spoken here. The Custodes do not communicate inside the throne room. All gestures are ritualized, all movement is prescribed. The atmosphere is heavy with ozone, incense, and absolute reverence. This is not a war zone, it is a living reliquary. Their training is brutal. To join the Black Guard, a custodian must meditate in absolute darkness for months, undergo intense purity trials, and defeat their own brothers in simulated break-the-body contests. Many fail, some do not survive, but those who succeed are transformed. The Black Guard act as personal judges within the ranks. If a custodian ever begins to falter, to question his purpose beyond a meditative threshold, it is the Black Guard who decide his fate. Exile, death, or ritual obliteration of memory are all possibilities. What separates the Custodes from any other force in the galaxy is not just power, but self-discipline. Over the millennia, the Custodians have developed an internal code of conduct so rigid, so ancient, that even the Inquisition dares not intrude upon it. Speech is one such element. Many Custodes go centuries without uttering a single word. Communication is often done through hand signs, coded eye movements, or ceremonial gestures. When a Custodian does speak, it is an event, a declaration often remembered in written form. What separates the Custodes from any other force in the galaxy is not just power, but self-discipline. Over the millennia, the Custodians have developed an internal code of conduct so rigid, so ancient, that even the Inquisition dares not intrude upon it. Speech is one such element. Many Custodes go centuries without uttering a single word. Communication is often done through hand signs, coded eye movements, or ceremonial gestures. When a Custodian does speak, it is an event, a declaration often remembered in written form. Meditation is another constant. Custodians train their minds as rigorously as their bodies. Each warrior has memorized volumes of imperial philosophy, tactical theory, and metaphysical speculation. This intellectual edge is what separates them from even the most elite of space marines. The code of vigil governs everything: how one stands, how one observes, how one judges threat. It includes the 10,000 teachings, an internal litany recited before every deployment, and the golden silence, a vow of contemplation taken at the beginning of every year-long cycle. These rituals do not weaken the Custodes, they sharpen them, turning power into precision and immortality into meaning. The formation of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, tore the galaxy in half. Warp storms engulfed entire sectors. Communication broke down. Planets were isolated, overrun, or swallowed by the Imperium. The Astronomicon flickered. Panic gripped the Imperium. For the first time in millennia, even Terra itself was vulnerable. And it was then that the Adeptus Custodes acted. The Chamber of Vigilance, long dormant, declared that the time of silence was over. The decision was not made lightly, but the threat was existential. If the Emperor's realm fell, no vigil would matter. The throne would become a tomb in a galaxy of monsters. Under their Captain General, Trajan Valoris, the 10,000 began to reawaken. Dormant armor was reactivated. Weapons long sealed in vaults were blessed and drawn. Ancient oaths were restated. For the first time in 10 millennia, golden giants stepped beyond the walls of Terra. When Robuta Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, returned to life and walked into the throne room, the Custodes stood in his path. They had never knelt to a Primarch, and they would not start now. The reunion was cold. The Custodes had never fully trusted the Primarchs, and Guilliman, despite his genius, was still a relic of the Heresy era. But Guilliman did not demand allegiance. Instead, he offered purpose. The Indomitus Crusade would need the might of the Custodes. The galaxy was broken. Demons walked in daylight. Traitor legions were on the move again. Guilliman gave the Custodes something they hadn't had in 10,000 years, a war worth fighting. Trajan Valoris accepted, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. The 10,000 would fight, but on their terms, under their command, and in pursuit of the Emperor's will as they understood it. The Custodes did not immediately leave Terra. First, they purged the walls. Over the centuries, rot had spread within the Imperial Palace. Cults, heresies, and hidden networks of corruption had embedded themselves in the shadows of Terra's very heart. Before the Custodes could defend the galaxy, they had to cleanse their own house. The Red Cloak campaign saw hundreds of rogue psychers, demagogues, and even traitorous inquisitors executed in the dark. It was said that entire sub-levels of the palace were sealed off, never to be opened again. Only once Terra was pure did the Custodes step aboard their warships. Then began the greatest campaign of custodian action since the Heresy, the interventions of the Indomitus Crusade. The Custodes returned to war, but not as they had before. No longer limited to guarding the throne, they now took part in full battlefield operations alongside Primaris Space Marines, Imperial Knights, and the newly reformed Imperial Guard forces. But their methods remained distinct. Where Astartes strike as companies, the Custodes strike as individuals. Each custodian is a living demigod, capable of turning the tide of an entire front. They are used surgically, often deployed to eliminate a Chaos Warlord, destroy a Necron Overlord, or assassinate a Demon Prince before a war can even begin. Trajan Valoris redefined their role. No longer merely reactive, the Custodes now engage in strategic preemption. They act before threats escalate. Their presence is rare, but when it is seen, it is unforgettable. And their message is clear: the Emperor is not dead, his wrath still walks. As the Indomitus Crusade launched under Robert Guilliman's command, the Adeptus Custodes joined its most critical and dangerous missions. They did not follow fleet orders. Instead, they were embedded as autonomous agents, acting when Guilliman or Trajan deemed the situation beyond conventional military response. On the fringes of the Nachmund Gauntlet, custodian kill teams were deployed aboard black ships to cleanse demon infestations before they could manifest. In the Cadian Gate, squads of custodians faced down warbands of the Black Legion in post-Cadia shock campaigns, eliminating key Chaos Warlords to prevent sector-wide collapse. Perhaps most famously, the Siege of Gathalamor saw a full shield host descend upon a planet overrun by Tzeentchian cults. The Custodes did not just break the enemy, they purged the planet's nobility, sanctioned rogue administratum officials, and left a message written in burning gold upon the surface: the Emperor judges all. As warfare in the galaxy became more fragmented and unpredictable, the Custodes adapted. They formalized the shield hosts, specialized subdivisions of the 10,000, each with its own doctrine, philosophy, and combat role. Some examples include Solar Watch, masters of lightning strikes and rapid planetary redeployment; Shadowkeepers, jailers and seekers of forbidden threats, often battling demonic entities and ancient vault breaches; Dreadhost, brutal shock assault forces used to break entrenched resistance through overwhelming force; Emissaries Imperatus, diplomatic custodians assigned to high-level imperial functions or sent as political reminders of the Emperor's will. Each shield host maintains its own heraldry, rituals, and armament traditions, a way to preserve individualism within the unity of purpose. These hosts act like autonomous strike orders, often with their own fleets and Forge World ties. In the Macarian sector, custodians intervened in a brutal campaign against Orc freebooters who had overtaken a rogue trader Charter World. Their arrival shattered the warbands in hours. The entire campaign lasted 2 days. On the shattered shrine world of Heraklion, a contingent of Shadowkeepers was deployed to confront an emergent chaos cult masquerading as a loyal missionary force. The Custodes executed 2 full ecclesiarchy synods and purged 3 entire hive districts before declaring the planet compliant. In the battle for the sacred forge of Zephan Delta, a combined Custodes Skitarii task force fought off a simultaneous Necron Reawakening and a warp breach. It was here that a lone custodian guard, identified only as Octa Noctis, held a defense corridor against 200 Necron immortals for 6 hours before reinforcements arrived. His armor was later enshrined aboard the custodian flagship Auric Edict. These engagements highlight what makes the Custodes unique. They are not generals, they are solutions, sent where no other force can guarantee success. The Custodes do not age like mortal men. Some have lived for over 15,000 years. They remember the Unification Wars. They remember Horus alive. They remember the Emperor walking, speaking, dreaming. This immortality, once seen as a gift, is in fact a weight few can comprehend. Every failure, every lost brother, every error is never forgotten. They carry memory not as nostalgia, but as punishment. To outlive your purpose is not triumph, it is torment. Many custodians retreat into long, meditative isolation between deployments. They walk the halls of echoes, corridors within the palace lined with statues of fallen brothers. There they confront, not death, but survival. Because every custodian who lives on after his failure is a living reminder that perfection, once tarnished, cannot be restored. Unlike most of the Imperium, the Custodes do not worship the Emperor as a god. They knew him, they stood at his side, they heard his voice. For them, he is not divine, he is real, and that makes his silence even more terrifying. Some Custodes privately question whether the Emperor still lives, or whether the faith of the Imperium has corrupted his vision. But they never voice this, not out of fear, but discipline. Their loyalty is not to doctrine, but to duty. This is perhaps the greatest paradox of the Custodes. They are the most faithful servants of the Emperor, yet among the least religious in the galaxy. Their reverence is personal, not doctrinal. They do not need proof. They need purpose. In the end, the Adeptus Custodes are not just the protectors of the Emperor. They are the memory of what the Imperium was meant to be. Where others see war and fire, they remember unity. Where others serve gods, they remember the man who refused divinity. They are unmatched, yes, unbroken, always, but also alone. The 10,000 were never meant to conquer. They were meant to watch, to choose, to endure. And now, as the galaxy spirals deeper into madness, it is they who hold the line. Not because they believe they will win, but because they cannot allow themselves to fail again. For in this dying age of stars, where gods devour men and hope is heresy, the Custodes still stand, and while they stand, the dream of the Emperor endures.